Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for showing up tonight for our event, Presidential Lies, Deception in the Presidential Election. I'm Dr. Drew Curtis from the Psychology Department. It's an honor and privilege to host this event for you all. Thank you all for showing up. With you tonight, we have a wonderful panelist who will be speaking, Dr. Cheryl Stenmsrk from Psychology, Dr. Connie Heimann from Biology, Dr. Deanna Watts from Political Science, and Dr. Jesse Taylor from Mathematics. So if you showed up tonight because you're hoping to get an answer about which presidential candidate we will endorse, you might be let down. The intent of this is not to endorse a specific candidate, but rather provide you with a multidisciplinary perspective about a current event, which is the presidential election, and a topic that we find fascinating and think is related, deception. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into an overview of deception, sharing a little bit about deception. Before I do, I want to introduce you all to my daughter. Yeah, you can say all, that's okay. This is my wonderful daughter, Margaret Jane. She is 3 years old. She melts my heart. She's a wonderful, wonderful child. She and some of my other kids love snacks, especially the sugary ones. However, I'm a mean dad. If you don't finish your meal or eat your meal at our house, you can't have the snacks. So one day she asked her mother, who's with us here in the audience, she asked her, "Mom, can I have a snack?" My wife asked, "Did you eat your noodles?" My daughter quickly replied, "Yes, but don't look at my plate." My sweet daughter is a liar. Unlike my youngest son, Titus, who looks a little rough around the edges, he's about a year and a half. He has lots of words, a couple two-word sentences, doing great. He loves mud. He loves getting muddy. He doesn't lie. Some of this is based on some research from Sodian published in 1991. Sodian found that we learn to deceive people roughly around the age of about 3 and a half. I set up a game where there was a puppet game and you would hide stars from a bad guy, asking children to deceive the researcher, and found that children before the age of 3 don't have those mechanisms for deception. So we learned deception roughly around the age of 3. So we learn to lie, much like my daughter, to get things we want. She wanted some dessert. We also learn to lie to avoid consequences. Maybe if you color on the wall, you want to blame your sibling so you don't get in trouble for that. So Skinner called this the principles of operant learning, or learning via reinforcement, to avoid spankings, discipline, humiliation. So we learn to lie for those reasons. Who lies? In the famous words of TV doctor, Dr. Gregory House, everybody lies. This has been corroborated by some research from Bella DiPaolo from Harvard and her colleagues in several diary studies, finding that people tell on average about 2 lies a day. So your people, you tell on average 2 lies per day. Most of the lies we tell are called social lies or everyday lies. And these lies are, when you see someone, you say, "How are you doing today?" And you say, "Great," even though you had a horrible day, you spilled coffee on yourself, you're late to work. You lie in those social situations. Some of the lies are more serious lies, and these are lies of greater consequences, relational lies, lies of infidelity, lies of finances. And the lies vary. We tell blatant lies where we say something blatantly that is not true. We keep things from people, which would be lies of omission. We even tell half-truths, a little bit of the truth, a little bit of not the truth. That's deception. And so lying is also universal. We see lying evidence historically throughout different cultures, throughout different times. We see in Christianity, Judaism, in the Bible, the serpent lies to Adam and Eve to deceive them about the fruit. We see in Greek and Norse mythology, Hindu, the trickster. We see in Hinduism, Krishna is seen as deceptive. We even see in the famous tales of a boy who cried wolf, right? That you shouldn't lie. If you do lie, you're going to be eaten by wolves. Right? There's a moral. Don't lie. So what counts as a lie? One of the most comprehensive definitions by Outer Breeze is this definition here. I'm not going to read it to you, but The idea here is you are intentionally creating a belief in someone else that you do not believe to be true, regardless of the success. Sometimes lies are caught, sometimes they are not discovered. So the idea is trying to make someone believe something you don't believe to be true. So we lie not only to avoid consequences or to get dessert, sometimes we lie for impression management, impression formation. We want people to think we're bigger than we are. We want people to think we're grander than we are. We might lie to get jobs. We exaggerate features of ourselves. You might lie on a first date. You say things like, "That's my favorite band. I love that food too. That's the best food in the world." Anything that might secure you a second date. You want to create and foster an impression. So we might do this. And so are we any good? Seems like we have mechanisms for lying. We lie. We see it cross-culturally. Are we good at detecting deception? What we find in research is that humans aren't very good at detecting deception. About as good as flipping a coin. About as good as flipping a coin. So if you're trying to discern is someone lying, flipping a coin, be about the same accuracy. DiPaolo and Bond found in 2006, they conducted a meta-analysis looking at 206 deception studies and found across those deception detection studies, 54% correct lie-truth judgment. So not good. What about professionals? What about professionals? What about police officers, polygraphers? Are they any better? Albert Breege has found not much better. So humans aren't very good at detecting deception. One of the reasons is because we hold inaccurate beliefs about what deception looks like. If I were to ask you, what does a liar look like? You might hold a belief that when people lie, they do something. Look away. You might even hold a belief that when they look away, they look to a certain direction, maybe to the left. You've heard that. In fact, a global deception research team looked at 58 countries and found that this is one of the most top beliefs held across the countries is that people look away when they're lying. And it is actually not an indicator of deception. So we rely on this belief, and it doesn't give us any indications of deception. Well, what about machines? Sometimes we call this the lie detector test. However, it's not a lie detector test, it's a polygraph. So we find that polygraphs, EEGs, and fMRIs do a little better than humans. The accuracy rates here go up to about 80%. So there's still a 20% error. Better than humans, but still some error. So generally, we're not very good at detecting lies. We also, if you've ever been lied to, know that you probably don't like it. You probably don't like being the target of deception. Many people have negative attitudes toward deception. Some of my research that has looked at college students here at ASU have lots of negative attitudes towards people who lie and towards being lied to. Some other research I was involved in, looking at relationships. We hold a moral hypocrisy in relationships. We think that it is acceptable for us to tell our partners white lies. A white lie would be something like saying, "Your haircut looks great," when you don't think it does. So make sure after this presentation you tell me that, because I need some of that feedback. We think that it's acceptable for us to lie to our partners, but in return we don't want them to lie to us. So we hold negative attitudes towards lies, even professionals. Some of the research I've conducted looking at psychotherapists, nurses, physical therapy students, all of these professional groups hold negative attitudes towards clients and patients who lie. So what about the presidency? What about the presidency? Honesty has always been important in the presidency. We see individuals such as Abraham Lincoln called Honest Abe, the importance of honesty. George Washington, there's a myth about George Washington that he cannot tell a lie. Right, that he cut down the tree. We think of other presidents like JFK, who discussed the Bay of Pigs debacle, reporting its unsuccess, and we hold honesty. In fact, Fournier and Thompson in 2007 found that honesty is viewed as one of the most important qualities when considering a presidential candidate. More important than intelligence, leadership and experience. We value honesty in our candidates more than those things. We see it as important. We also deem deception important. Individuals like Richard Nixon in the Watergate scandal, President Bill Clinton did not have sex with that woman. In fact, these are just a couple examples. Generally, most people, Gallup poll 2014, Sirota and colleagues 2010, find that politicians have a reputation, probably unsurprising to you all, for being the most deceptive than any other class of people. Not surprising to you all, right? You might have this idea that if their lips are moving, then they are. Yeah, sure. So we have this belief. So honesty was valued last night during the debate as well, and we'll continue to see it in the current presidential election. Last night, if you paid attention to the debate, you hear each candidate making claims to look at their websites for fact checkers, right, to portray that they are honest. Perceived deception was also highlighted. Candidates used argumentum ad hominem, which means attacking the other person, trying to make the other person look like a liar. So there were a couple examples you might have noted against Trump last night, talking about the birther records in President Obama, and then against Clinton, talking about her to release her emails. So we have these perceived deception, saying I'm honest and this other candidate is less than honest and maybe a blatant liar. So in conclusion, as you continue to evaluate the election, the current election, and future elections, remember that most people lie. We don't like being lied to. We're not good at detecting lies. And we hold many false beliefs about lying. And so when you think about the candidates, consider what is the function. That's what I encourage you. What is the function of the lie? Are the candidates trying to manage an impression, exaggerate themselves? Are they trying to avoid some negative consequence? Or much like my daughter, they just trying to get dessert? Thank you.
The shortest person goes after the tallest person, so I have to adjust that mic there. I'm Cheryl Stenmsrk from the psychology department as well, and I'm going to be talking about leadership and deception. So I'd like to first start with to give you guys a general definition of leadership. There are lots of definitions of leadership, but we're just going to go with a pretty general one that's pretty all-inclusive, and I've highlighted a couple of terms in this definition. Process, influence, and the individuals. So I want to highlight the fact that leadership is a process. Leadership is dynamic. Leadership changes over time, and it changes in response to behaviors by the leader and by the followers. Also, leadership is an influence process. Leaders have influence over their followers. And finally, the group of individuals, those are the followers. So we're including followers in our definition of leadership because the followers are a vital part of the leadership equation. You can't have a leader without followers. And certainly as we talk about leadership and deception, the role of the followers is very important. So I want to also talk to you guys a little bit about some of the theoretical approaches to leadership, especially as they relate to concepts related to deception. The kind of earliest theoretical approach to leadership was the trait approach. That the focus of the trait approach was to determine a list of traits or characteristics that would kind of define a leader, what makes a leader, what makes a leader effective. And it turns out that approach to leadership ended up generating lots and lots of lists of characteristics that are important for leadership. So it wasn't so successful in terms of defining leadership, but consistently across these lists of characteristics important for leadership, you see things like integrity and trustworthy and honesty. So even the earliest conceptualizations of leadership emphasized the importance of a leader's honesty. We also have the skills approach, which talks about 3 different types of skills, including technical and cognitive skills, but also emphasizes interpersonal skills. And interpersonal skills involve creating an atmosphere of trust with followers. That's important for developing good interpersonal relationships. And the behavioral approach focuses on different behaviors that leaders can engage in. They can focus on the task, and they can focus on relationships with followers. And relationship behaviors involve increasing mutual trust and respect between leaders and followers. And some more modern theoretical approaches to leadership include transformational leadership and leader-member exchange theory. And transformational leadership, the focus of that is how leaders can encourage followers to reach their full potential. And a big element involved in transformational leadership is leaders being good role models, especially in terms of being ethical and behaving in an ethical way. And in addition, with transformational leadership, it's important for leaders to respect and be trustworthy with their followers. And finally, the leader-member exchange theory focuses on the individual relationships that each leader has with their individual followers. And this theory says that these relationships can be either high quality or low quality, and high-quality relationships are built on mutual trust and respect, and they're built by honest and open exchange between the leaders and the followers. So any deceptive behaviors engaged in by leaders can violate trust and result in reducing the quality of the relationship. So you can see among these 5 theoretical approaches to leadership, trust is a key factor. So it's clear that trust is crucial for leadership and the leader-follower relationships. Trust fosters positive attitudes toward the leader, and it also, we're gonna see the implications of this later, but trusting the leader actually can influence the followers' reactions toward the organization as a whole. And the relationship of trust serves as an important motivating factor for both enhancing employee attitudes or follower attitudes and follower performance and productivity and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Leader deception, though, has the potential to violate that trust, and that would undermine the benefits that come from a trusting relationship between a leader and a follower. So there are numerous motivations to lie, and these reasons can be either egotistical and selfish, or they can be more altruistic. And when people view deception as benefiting the deceiver for self-gain, it is considered much less acceptable than if the deception is viewed as being for the benefit of other people. So if deception is interpreted as being having altruistic motives and being for the social good, it's actually people can kind of justify that type of deception, and we can even kind of get into the idea that some lies are actually kind of acceptable. So when leaders see the potential for gain by engaging in deception, or if they feel like they could avoid loss by not deceiving, they're more likely to engage in deception and to rationalize and justify that type of deceptive behavior. So in situations where the deception is perceived as being, to benefit other people, it's more acceptable and kind of, we'll call it works, but we'll put it in quotation marks, as we'll talk about later. So white lies are considered, in some cases, a little bit more acceptable, at least neutral, potentially not as negative as some of the other deceptive behaviors that we will get into. But with white lies, the intention is to avoid the consequences of a hurtful but more truthful statement. And the intention is to usually to reduce conflict in a relationship. Also, using deception for the social good can be justified more so by leaders and subordinates. For example, when leaders and subordinates engage in deceptive behavior, they can maintain good relationships if the deception leads to mutually satisfying consequences for both parties. And trust can be maintained if the deceptive acts are seen as having a pro-social value. So when subordinates actually end up benefiting from leader dishonesty, they are more able to accept the deception by focusing only on the positive outcomes that they gained from the deceptive act. And one example of a pro-social deceptive behavior is when a leader lies in order to protect the followers. For example, if the leader has to deliver bad news, maybe some criticism from an upper level leader or executive, they can present the information in such a way to lessen that emotional blow of the harsh criticism so that they are delivering the desired message without damaging their relationships with the followers. But deception does not always work. And in fact, even when it works, it may be that the deception doesn't appear to cost too much in the short term, but it's still likely to have long-term negative consequences, especially with regard to subordinate or follower trust in the leader. So once deception is detected, it often results in the consequences that the deceiver was trying to avoid in the first place. The deceiver often loses credibility. The person who is deceived loses trust, and it damages those personal relationships. There are other consequences, very bad consequences that can happen in response to leader deception. First, the follower can feel bad toward the leader, lose trust, begin to dislike the leader. So we have that kind of direct consequence between the leader and the follower. But actually, when the follower experiences deception from the leader and distrust in the leader, that distrust can extend to the organization as a whole, and the follower can lose their commitment and liking of the organization, because leaders serve as the visible faces of organizations, and when leaders engage in deceptive behavior, it actually communicates the message to followers that the organization values deception. Leaders are where followers get their cues for norms and values and kind of cultural issues. So when leaders engage in deception, it can actually foster deception in followers and create an unethical organizational climate. Because the followers, this sends the message that the organization values success at any cost, even if you have to lie to succeed. So you end up fostering that deception, unintentionally probably. So given that we have some situations where deception is considered acceptable or sometimes even necessary, it's not surprising that it's pretty common for leaders to engage in deception strategically when interacting with followers. Plus, leaders have control over rewards that they can give to followers. So they can manipulate outcomes and rewards in order to lessen the negative impact of their deception to followers. And we also know that the follower reactions to deception depends on how they interpret the deception, whether it is interpreted as intended for self-gain from the leader, or if it is intended to benefit the organization as a whole and have, done for the greater good. And organizational benefit makes it easier for the leader and the subordinate to justify deceptive behavior. But even if you get away with deception in the short term, so promoting those organizational benefits may help you get away with the deception in the short term, but that does not mean that the deception is okay or it's going to work out, because as we know, as I just mentioned, deception in the organizational leadership can actually encourage the followers to engage in deception. This happened with Enron, and I think we're seeing a little bit of this with the fallout from the Wells Fargo case, where the leaders deceive, but they package their deception as being for organizational gain to make it more justifiable, and then the followers, the other people in the organization, catch on and start engaging in similar deceptive acts. So I left this intentionally kind of open in general so that you guys can make your own, draw your own conclusions about how this will affect your decisions as you think about the presidential race. But I'll just leave you with this. If we take what we know about leadership and deception and apply it directly to the leader of the country, either way, deception is bad news, because best case scenario, the deception is viewed in a positive light, and then we end up with a culture that has normalized deception and accepts deception as a viable means to an end, whatever it is. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, the deception is perceived in a negative light, and the followers, the citizens of the country, cannot trust the leader and then extend that distrust to the government and potentially the country as a whole. So that's what I've got. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Connie Heimann. I'm a professor of biology here at Angelo State, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more generally about deception. I'm going to provide what's hopefully a biological perspective, and I've got a lot of stuff to get through, so we'll get right to it. So deception at its heart is a miscommunication or a misleading communication. So spending a little bit of time talking about what the benefit to communicating is to begin with, I think is in order. Communication is required at all levels of organization. If you're going to get the benefits of complexity and efficiency by having division of labor, there has to be communication between the different parts to harvest that efficiency. Without it, it's just a bunch of noise, and it's hard to pick out what the signal is supposed to be from all the random noise. And it requires quite a bit of cooperation on the part of the constituents. I have a picture here of neurons, and certainly without the cooperation between the molecules and the cells here, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation that we're having now. So cooperation and coordination are part of sharing information. It can be as simple as sharing molecules from one generation to the next, and that's basically what happens when we give our DNA to our offspring, is we provide that information in a genetic format to the next generation. It can be simple signals, and I'll talk a little bit more on those in a minute, or it can be more complex combinatorial representations. But all these forms of cooperation and coordination and communication at its heart is extracting information from the environment that can be transmitted to other individuals. So, I found this quote and I thought this was very interesting. The whole benefit to being able to share information is in, at its heart, the difference between sharing information and sharing physical resources. If I share a physical resource with you, if I have an apple and you have an apple, and we exchange apples, we both still only have an apple. We haven't increased our acquisition of resources. But if I have an idea and you have an idea and we switch ideas, now we each have an idea. So it grows, it gets bigger. And that's something that information can do that exchanging physical resources does not allow for. So what does this have to do with deception? As I've mentioned, sharing information can be beneficial. It can also be dangerous on a lot of different levels. The idea here is that signalers can change the behavior of the signal receiver. And when there's basically two possible outcomes from this exchange. If the interest of the signaler and the interest of the signal receiver are the same, then you should be honest. Honesty should be the best policy here. If everybody's on the same page and you're moving toward the same goal, you should be honest in your dealings from a biological perspective. However, if the interest of the signaler and the interest of the signal receiver are not the same, then there are two possible outcomes. You can still be required to provide an honest signal, and I'll give an example of that in just a minute, or it opens the door to deceptive signals and makes deceptive signals perhaps be the best policy, depending on what your hope is. So let's talk about honest signals first. On that first choice, if we have a disconnect between the interest of the signal giver and the signal receiver. You see honest signals when the costs of providing the signal are very high. Basically, it's cost so much to provide an honest signal that the signal receiver can be fairly certain that that signal is honest. And we see these in systems like with the peacock here. A female peacock is the intended recipient of the signal that the male is sending with that great big tail. It costs him so much to produce that tail, and it actually could be detrimental. It makes it easier for a predator to pick him off. But by producing that great big tail, he is letting the female know that he really is a better female than a better male than the next guy. So the female needs to be sure of that signal. If a lesser quality male could make the same signal, she couldn't be as sure of the honesty of it. The only way she'd be able to tell would require her to actually mate with the male, have offspring, the offspring not be as good as advertised, and by that time he's long gone and she doesn't have any way of punishing him for providing the deceptive signal. So when we see these big showy productions that some animal systems use, that's basically what they're doing. They're advertising the honesty of their quality. Not all animals do this. This little sparrow, or this little group of sparrows, have a different solution to this problem. Instead of putting a lot of energy into the signal itself, which they don't really have a way of doing, the cost to the deceiver in this sense comes from the signal receivers. If in these little sparrows, that little black patch on the little sparrow there on the right is it's called a badge, and it is an indication of his quality. Males that are bigger and healthier and don't have, aren't sick or have been well fed, have a bigger territory maybe, produce that bigger patch, and males that are not as high quality produce a patch like the little one there on the left. Okay? If the lower quality male, by some miracle, managed to produce a bigger patch, he would be setting himself up to be attacked by the other males. These little sparrows fight all the time. They fight over territories, they fight over females, they fight all the time, and there's a high cost to that because you might not make it out of the other end of the fight, you might be injured. So having that badge, you better be able to back it up. So in this sense, the cost is on the other end of the signal. So this is the basic problem with these types of communication. There's this asymmetry in the information. There has to be a gain to the exchange, and sometimes there are strategic conflicts. So I'm going to talk about each one of those as we go. And remember that second possibility when you should be deceptive. So let's talk about these different types of deception. Okay, so how do we use deception in nature? We use it to secure food, like getting a cookie when you want a cookie, to avoid predation, to secure reproduction, which I've kind of already talked on here, and to gain social advantage or to reduce social conflicts. So I have examples of each of these. Hopefully these videos are going to play because you can't talk about behavior without showing it. So go ahead and show that first video. Okay, this is an example of something called aggressive mimicry, where we have an anglerfish here who's waving that little lure around on top of his head with the hopes of convincing the signal receiver, that he's some really tasty little piece of food. And so he waves it around and waves it around, and sooner or later, somebody's going to take him up on this deception. So the hapless prey here is going to come with this little squid. For most of the squid's experience, small, wiggly, shiny things are food. And so it's not surprising that he buys the deception. For the deception to work for the anglerfish, the experience of the signal receiver has to be, for the most part, that in most cases, on average, that really is food. It's not the lie. Something a little bit more, which seems a little more intentional here. Okay, can you forward it to the next one? It's not going on. There we go. This is going to be a video of a drogo bird that is a social, I guess, cooperator with these meerkats. And for most of the time, he sends signals to these meerkats and helps them out. So if you could play that. Oops. So in this case, he spotted an eagle, and y'all can't hear it, but he's giving a signal that lets the meerkats know it's there, and they scurry away. And they go find a place to hide. So now he's got their trust. He's helped them out. Okay? Now he sets them up to not be so helpful. So he sees a potential food item, he makes the same signal, and again, they buy the signal, they run for cover, and he's going to come and get a free meal. Now, you may think, well, how could they bud it? They don't bother to check to see if he's lying or not. On most of the time, he sends an honest signal. Again, if he sends that dishonest signal too often, they're going to quit responding to it. Okay, so that was securing food. There's lots of examples of deception to avoid predation. Some of them are just simple mimicry, where you're sending a visual cue that you are something other than you appear. This is a butterfly that looks like a leaf, and if it opens up its wings and lays them flat, you'll see it's very brightly colored, like what you expect a butterfly to look like. But when it's hiding on the branch like that, it folds them up so it looks like a leaf. Can you guys see the praying mantis in there? It looks like the other sticks till it moves. And then this little guy, he sends his deception is not just a visual cue. He looks very similar to the reeds around him, but he will actually sway in the breeze with the grass around him. He'll stick his head up and he'll just wave back and forth. You don't see. All right, this guy, this is what he looks like at the end. I wanted you to see what he looked like, and the camera person had to get really, really close to this octopus to get him to change color. I want you to see what he looked like to start with. If you could play that. These guys are masters of disguise. Cephalopods are some of my favorite organisms anyway. And he scared this poor cameraman to death. If you could hear the video and play at the beginning of this, he actually like kind of screamed a little bit when it changed colors really, really fast like that. So avoiding predation. Okay. Even plants send deceptive signals to secure reproduction. So this is an orchid. This orchid is designed to look like a female wasp. The wasp is trying his best to mate with this flower. And in trying to mate with the flower, he picks up the pollen packets from the orchid. And he'll give up after a while and he'll fly off and eventually come across another orchid that looks like the female of his species, and he'll transfer the packet to them. Now again, this only works if it looks very close or very similar to the female wasp, and if there are more female wasps around than there are orchids. So he buys the deception. And then finally, if it will go on to the next one. Yeah, there we go. All right. Another cephalopod. Cephalopods are really, really cool. If you just run out of something to do, sometime go YouTube cephalopod behavior and you'll get all kinds of really cool stuff. But these are cuttlefish. So the males are protecting the female underneath them. So he's about the same size as a female. And he's going to look like a female. And to make a long story short, he's going to be allowed to move under the male so that he can protect them. The male thinks he's just doing really, really well. And while he's being protected by the male, he's mating with the female that's already under there. So go on to the next one. So the male thinks he's just doing really well. I have one more I don't have time for. I'm out of time. But the other one is to reduce social conflict. The real take-home message on this one is this mother is going to come up to her son, and she wants something to eat. She doesn't have any tools to open the nut, so she starts grooming. This is something she probably does on a regular basis, is groom him. And she'll stop grooming shortly and expect him to return the grooming favor. This is something in chimp societies that they do quite frequently. And this is a behavior that the son could reasonably expect his mother to make. And that's the key to it. It has to be something that normally they do. So he'll start to groom her. And when he moves far enough away, watch her face. she just pulled it off, and you know, there's not really much she can do about it. So just the take-home message here, if we could go one more slide forward. Yeah, this is up. Is there's a paradox. For these signals to have evolved in the first place, honesty kind of had to come first. The deception comes where there is a conflict between what the signaler and the receiver want, but it has to be pretty rare. So that brings us, if you try to tie it to this election cycle, there's a reason why I think we're becoming very suspicious of our politicians. So thank you.
There we go. So let me just test something out real quick to make sure. Oop, I did it. Okay. Oh no! No! Okay. Trying to figure out which way. So I was born backwards, so I'm always doing things backwards. But I'm Deanna Watts from the Political Science Department. It's been a very lively semester so far. So. Oh, sorry. I can't. I'm also short. We should have had a little thing right here. Right here. But just so it doesn't go to waste, I'd like to share my original working title for this presentation. It was, "I've come here to kiss babies and make promises I can't keep, and I'm all out of babies." So, well, opted for something a little bit more professional. But, you know, why do presidential candidates lie? And why do we think that they're lying constantly, apparently? One reason, there is a decline in civic education. A recent poll by Annenberg Public Policy Center, which is affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania, and it's a survey they've conducted since 2011, there's been a steady decline. And you know, what we know, voters that were polled, what we know about our governing institutions, what their governing authority is, or even what they are, just to name them. So, this is down from just last year. I think last year was like 31% of Americans could name all three branches. The fact that 31% couldn't name a single branch is a problem. You can't hold government accountable, or politicians accountable, or candidates accountable if you don't understand the office that they're trying to win. So one of the other issues as far as presidential candidates and how they, let's say, yeah, sometimes they do lie, but more often than not, I think they overstate what they can accomplish. They embellish what they're going to do and what they can achieve because they're selling themselves. And I love this quote by Charles O. Jones. He's my academic crush, as any of my former students will tell you. But who doesn't have an academic crush? Come on, guys. But the president is not the presidency. The presidency is not the government. Ours is not a presidential system. We tend to judge either the current president or people running for the presidency as the individual, not a constitutionally defined office. Whether or not how you perceive how the current president is doing, or even past presidents, depends on a lot on how you feel about them personally as the individual. I mean, we always hear about, as far as presidential candidates, would you want to have a beer with them? Are they likable? Are they like me? Well, hell no, they're not like me. They've got millions of dollars that they can run for president. Of course they're not like me. And I don't care if I can have a beer with them, because the odds of me having a beer with them are about 0. So, I want to know that they understand governing, they understand policy. But again, most people look at the individual candidates as if, you know, they alone, and they also do this to themselves. They create these very high expectations that they alone can change the system. It's all up to them. And it's not just these two candidates that we have now. You know, you can go back to, you know, previous presidential races, and every candidate is, I can do it. I can change the system. Well, one of the problems is campaigning is not governing, as Hugh Hecklow had cited. You can say, as long as you stay within the confines of campaign finance laws, you can say almost anything. Once you're in office, though, you know, you have to work with, you know, Congress. Sometimes you know, a policy issue that's very near and dear to your agenda gets struck down by the Supreme Court, which then you have to go back to Congress and ask them to, you know, revisit the issue. But again, I mean, there's, you know, it's not the individual, it's a constitutionally defined office. So how do, you know, presidential candidates respond to the lack of civic knowledge and this, you know, voter perception that it's the individual that can make a difference? One, they make unrealistic promises. So, you know, I see some, you know, my current students who were at the debates, we talked about the debate last night. Both candidates talked about either raising or cutting taxes, you know, gun legislation, trade legislation. The president can recommend it. Congress has to write it. That's Congress's job. They can talk about raising or cutting taxes all day long. Unless Congress, specifically when it comes to taxes, unless the House is going to write legislation and get it through, it's not going to happen. So there's another, you know, strategy called packaging the presidency, where presidential candidates are, you know, and this is the comparison that has been made, they're packaged and sold like a box of detergent, which even, you know, starting with Nixon, one of his campaign managers was a former advertising executive, H.R. Haldeman. Some of you might remember H.R. Watergate. Everything has to have a gate now after Watergate. So, so they're, you know, they work on the clothes, the hair. I mean, they will even adapt, I don't know, trying to throw back to the biology, adapt and have, if you go back, it's actually kind of funny, they'll change their accent. Has anybody ever seen a video of Hillary from back when Bill was governor? I mean, she sounded like, I don't know, I don't listen to, I'm almost very serious. I don't listen to country that much. Like, I don't know, Tammy Wynette or something. I mean, she's very, very Southern, but does, you know, she obviously has lost that accent since then. You know, her current president, but even, you know, other presidential candidates, President Bush, depending on the circumstances, would either get very, very Texas, or, you know, you kind of drop the accent a little bit, tone it down. Again, adapting to the environment and the image of the presidency and who they're appealing to. And then there's the strategic political communication and identifying their audience. I mean, there's extensive research in communications and political science that show, depending on the audience, politicians will change, you know, how they speak and what they're speaking about. You're not going to talk about Social Security if you're addressing a room full of college students. You're going to lose them in like 30 seconds flat, if you keep them that long. So, and things like that. And again, presidential candidates understand this. Even before Twitter and the internet, before cable. So here's an excerpt from a campaign memo from the Ford. It was for his re-election, but, you know, the Ford campaign. And noting that not only do they have to present a policy perspective, but also, you know, almost perform. It's not a they're not judged by normal standards. So there has to be an emotional appeal. Is there a little light thingy? This one? Sweet. So at the end, I don't know if anybody can see the little green light. Oh no, I broke it. Oop, crap. Nuts. Okay, sorry. These next 3 pages are from Reagan, at the time Governor Reagan, a strategy pamphlet talking about what they needed to do to be victorious in 1980. So again, and I kind of highlighted some of the key terms, targeting the states, making assumptions and projections, voter support and perception, so their current political environment. So the image, and image is mentioned a lot, leadership image. Do they have governing skills? All of that is part of the packaging. So I don't know if anybody can see, but addressing Carter and how to kind of do the attack style campaigning, this is where a surrogate comes in handy because it's very unpresidential looking. To attack your opponent, you have somebody else do it. It keeps you above the fray. So, and then again, taking advantage of the circumstances. So issues of special opportunity, what comes up during the campaign. So even for re-election, I mean, this one's a little bit harder to read, but when I was going through like the Clinton campaign, the Bill Clinton campaign strategy memos, a lot of it sounded like actually what Hillary's doing now, the different issues, the themes and things like that, but understanding the politics of how people work. They have to have people skills. Because you can't adapt if you don't know people. That's who you're dealing with. So, why do presidential candidates lie? Well, one, they have to. We go more on image than we do what the authority, legitimate authority of the office is. I mean, so, and some of my former students should know this one. I might call on you, Michael. Who was the last bald president? When was the last time we had a bald president? Eisenhower. Sorry, dude. I don't know if you have any aspirations or not, but so, when was the last time there was a president with a beard? The Republicans didn't want to run Reagan in 1980 because he had been divorced. Nancy wasn't his first wife. It was seen as scandalous, even though, divorce was pretty common at that point. So why do they lie? They have to. They have to project an image. The other reason, they can. We don't understand our governing institutions and what the boundaries of the office are. It's really easy. I don't know anything about cars. I go into mechanics. I'm kind of at their mercy. You need a new transmission. I'll go to another mechanic and get a second opinion, but, I really don't have enough information or enough knowledge to counter. It's the same thing with voting. Learn about government and call shenanigans, which is my favorite word. So, but, I don't know. That's kind of my thing. I think the phone keeps turning off, so I don't know. I think I'm at time. So, is that good?
All right, I'm actually going to try and lose the podium, but just let me know if you can't hear me. So, Making Numbers Lie. I think that title sounds pretty good. It's actually a deception, though, because the numbers don't actually lie, but you can dress them up in a way that makes them tell a story that's less than the truth. So, because I knew I was going to be the decided to focus on some specific examples and just ditch the theory. So for the next several minutes, we're going to be looking at a few examples of specific examples of politicians abusing numbers or data to tell a certain storyline, a certain narrative that does not necessarily the story that matches the data. Okay, so now politicians abuse numbers in a lot of ways, but we're going to be focusing specifically, we live in the social media age, infographics. Okay, so you see charts, statistics, pictures all around on social media. Those are the types of things we're going to be looking at. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. Here's example number one. This was tweeted out a little bit less than a year ago. It says, under President Obama, more students are earning to cut that food stamps budget, and it's less than 1%. They ought to be cutting the military budget. That's what I would interpret. That's how I would interpret this picture. Okay, so what's wrong with this picture? For starters, this looks nothing like the federal budget. Okay, so I don't know how familiar you are with how the government spends its money, but just as an example, you don't see Social Security up there. Nowhere in the pie chart. But Social Security, the government spends a lot of money on that. Okay? So, problem number one is, this is not actually a chart of all federal spending, it's just some of it. Alright? So, this actually does look very close to something called discretionary spending. So, in case you don't know, the government has two different types of spending, mandatory and discretionary. Mandatory is sort of formula-based, like if a person meets these standards, you have to pay so much money, versus discretionary, which branches of the government can vote to lower or raise just as a total budget line. So this actually does match up pretty closely with discretionary spending. Maybe that's what they meant. Maybe they meant to say, look at this chart, discretionary federal spending. Except the food stamps program is mandatory spending. So that's not great. So let's take a look at what the actual full budget looks like, discretionary and mandatory. Okay? So now we've got the big blue wedge up there is healthcare. That's things like Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare. Then you've got Social Security, another large chunk, the reddish bottom right. And now you see Defense, Homeland Security. That's what's previously labeled military, slightly more than 16% of the federal budget. Again, I'm not trying to offer up commentary on whether we should or should not be spending these amounts of money. I'm just saying that maybe saying we spend 57% of our money on the military when it's really 16%, not the best representation of that. Okay, so again, this doesn't fit the same narrative as the original. And what we've just seen in all these examples is, just like Dr. Curtis mentioned at the very beginning, is there are a lot of types of deception. That's true in the English language. That's also true when it comes to manipulating the numbers. Okay? Specifically, we've been talking about visual representation, but there are a lot of ways to do it. So, for example, we saw at the very beginning, they used accurate data. To the best of my knowledge, I checked those percentages on high school graduation rates, and they all seem to check out. So they used accurate data, and they gave a representation that was mostly true. Right? It was pretty accurate. I mean, in terms of that bar graph, comparing the stats of books, that was okay. That was the generally right idea. Then we had one, right, where they used the accurate data. They listed the numbers, and those, to the best of my research abilities, are the correct numbers on the Planned Parenthood. But they chose to represent it with a graphic that does not match the data at all. And in particular, they also sort of cherry-picked the data and didn't use everything available, right? They didn't take into account all procedures, just a couple, and made the case that maybe that was what needed to be compared. And then you've got this guy, which is, they say they're using a set of data when they aren't, right? I mean, there are a lot of different types of ways that you can manipulate these things to tell the narrative that you would like to be true. But they aren't always true. And in particular, you have to be really careful because when someone uses statistics and when someone uses things like pie charts and bar graphs and line graphs, it lends legitimacy to something. Right? We're all sort of guilty of, oh, well, look at the numbers. You can see. Right? I mean, like, when you see a chart, I bet you don't say, where did they get these numbers? What's the source on this stuff? I need to go check and see that this source actually matches this graph. Right? You're probably not doing that when you're scrolling through social media and you see some graph like this. So, just be careful, right? Remember, politicians, and this is not necessarily specific to presidential elections because I didn't really want to get into these particular candidates, and I couldn't also find really good examples for this particular election cycle. But, you got to be really careful because they always have an agenda, right? They have an agenda. So ask yourself, who is posting this? And then ask yourself, why would they do that? Right? Does this fit with what they want you to think? And if so, you might want to just be careful about believing in hook, line, and sinker. So, in conclusion, do your own research. Where not be true, just absorb it, and either check the numbers and then share it, or just absorb it and be like, huh, scroll.